by 23andMe when people would say, well, I do or I don't have the MTHFR gene for methylation, right? And we'll talk about what that means. But that's one gene. We're looking at 14 just in that category. So that could be somewhat misleading information to say you don't have any problem with methylating while it's one gene. We're looking at 14.
Are you going through life blind? This is Eyes Wide Open with Nick Thompson. On this podcast, we share knowledge and stories that build human connection while elevating stigmatized societal issues such as mental health, holistic wellness, culture, free speech, and more. All to ensure we show up in the world with our eyes wide open. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Eyes Wide Open. Today is going to be part 2 with Dr. Evelyn Higgins. I actually, after last week's episode, decided to go get my testing done for my Wired Biohealth to learn my genetics and things that I'm predisposed to from a mental and physical health perspective. And so today's episode is actually going to be with Dr. Evelyn walking me through my results and putting together a supplemental treatment plan to try and help me capitalize on some of the areas maybe my genetics are lacking. So I actually took the Wired for Biohealth test, which is a genetic test, and I just swabbed my mouth. I'll show you that here in just a second, and then we will hop right into that interview where Dr. Evelyn walks me through my results. Hey, everyone. Okay, so I got my Wired Biohealth kit today. I think it took maybe 4 business days, 3 business days, not too bad. So let's take a look at what's inside this thing. So it's very simple. You've got your kit here, your directions, very easy. I'm just going to swab the mouth for about 30 seconds and then prepaid mailing. So this should take just a few seconds here, and you see how easy it is before I send in my sample. Okay, so I've got the swab here. I'm going to do this real quickly here. So already it comes with a pre-made label, so you don't even have to fill much out. There's a little bit of paperwork here, but you got to swab this for 30 seconds in your right cheek. Take this, put it in the biohazard bag. Easy enough. Set this up here so I can see. Easy enough. Put it in the biohazard bag. Do not wrap the bag around the specimen. So just leave it like this. Place it inside. As I said, the envelope is all, whoops, I forgot to put the label on. That would have been not so good. So we'll put the label on right there. Put it back in. Close it up. And then there's a little piece of paperwork here that you've got to put in your test form. This is very easy. It's just your name. Name's already on there, actually. Phone number, address, and a couple just questions to check, and then you sign it. So pretty easy. Then I'm going to go drop this in the mail. It's USPS. And then in a few days, we're going to do a little follow-up and take a look at what my results are and what a treatment plan is. I have Dr. Evelyn Higgins with me here again today, who was on our episode last week where we were talking about some of the genetics that go into why we are the way we are. The biomarkers and substance abuse, mental health conditions, and your overall health. So as I said before, I actually went and had my Wired for Biohealth test done, which Dr. Evelyn Higgins is the founder of Wired Biohealth. So today we're going to actually run through the results and the process for me and my test that hopefully we'll learn some things a little bit about how I'm wired and see the whole process and the things that you can learn if you decide that this is an option for you. So welcome back. Thanks again for coming back on.
Oh my gosh, Nick, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, me too. I'm super excited to do this.
Our first conversation was so good that now it's like, now we're diving into the meat and potatoes, and it gets even more exciting.
Exactly. And one of the things I try to do with this podcast, which I say this on some, and I don't remember if I said it on last week's actually, because it's a few weeks after we recorded that first episode. Now that I've gone through the test and we're going to go to the results, but what I like to do with this show is not just always talk about things with experts, but like go through sort of like the learning experience of stuff, because I'm learning in my podcast most of the time as we go through it. Like I'll research guests and stuff, but I'm not an expert in most of the things that I have people talk about on this show. So I think it's cool to kind of like go through some of this stuff as much as we can in a virtual world and learn together what this whole process looks like. And who knows what I'm going to learn about myself today.
Absolutely. And you doing it, Nick, makes it so valuable for other people, because it's like, well, Nick did it. So now I'm not afraid, or what am I going to find? And it's only going to help someone in their life. That I promise you.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. And that's kind of how I think about it too. One of the, I used to be a very private person, like very private. I wouldn't share anything like this. I wouldn't talk about my mental health, anything like that. And once I went on reality TV and I realized like they'll dig into your Venmo transactions. They'll follow you around town. There'll be Reddit threads about what you're doing. And I'm just like, I might as well start using some of like these things that are a little stigmatized or unknown and just start putting it out there.
Yeah. You're better off,
Exactly.
If that's how your life is now as a result of the reality TV, then like, let's go. This is my life, but let me be the one who shows you my real life.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So before we get started on the results, do you want to sort of recap for you what this biomarker report is supposed to show? I just did a little swab of my mouth, which I have a clip that I showed right before we started this episode. So do you want to remind people, review people? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So Wire Biohealth, we look at the biomarkers related to your health, general well-being, to your mental health, even to addiction. All of that plays into it, and why we look at specific groups on a cellular level that we do, why they have more impact than other genes. And it's a really simple, as you are showing your viewers, Nick, buccal swab, cheek swab, right? And that's all we need to do to be able to look at this, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And when people have asked me before in different, whether podcast, TV, whatever, media, and they're like, where do you want to see this? This is like beyond cool. Where do you want to see this? I'm like, I want to see it like a CBC, one day, a complete blood count. You go to your doctor and it's like, okay, let's do your blood, see how your health is. Well, this is a one-time thing. We don't repeat this because your genes, your DNA that you're given at birth is your DNA. What we're doing is called epigenetics. And that changes the expression of those genes. So you have the ability to operate in a different way throughout your life. So to me, it's like, shouldn't everyone have this done to know what's your operating system?
Yeah.
Because life can be so much easier if we know that information. We have 8 billion people in the world with 8 billion different sets of DNA, yet we treat everybody as if they have exactly the same DNA, which makes absolutely no sense.
Do you think that's a lack of knowledge, or do you think that's just because there's so many different people that you almost have to apply sort of a template to it, or probably both?
Great question. Both, because in fairness, this is only the technology to look at what we look at Biohealth wasn't around, right? So it was only 2003, human genomes mapped out. 2008, the 1,000 most important genes for diseases and conditions is studied greater. Then it took another 4 years to get to the meat and potatoes of it. So now we're at 2012. Every gene, while it's important, doesn't have the same impact.
Right.
So doing all of the information for what's the biggest impact in someone's life. And then 2015, technology becomes available to be able to look at these for an individual.
That's
so
just
this is great stuff.
9 years ago. It's like 9 years ago.
Right. And then we had COVID in the middle of all that. So nobody was thinking outside of COVID, really, in science, right? Everybody was just, we've got to do this. So that kind of got put on the back burner. Now that we're coming back to life, so to speak, it's like this should really be employed for everyone, because if you know, as I said, what your operating system is, your life can be so much easier.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, to kind of, the way I think about it, to dumb it down for people like me that aren't super intelligent, like one of the comparisons or frame of minds I'm approaching it with is like, and this actually comes up in here, 10 years ago, now like 11 years ago, I gave up gluten. And I gave up gluten because I was just starting to like learn about what's really healthy as opposed to what I was taught was healthy, and
Right.
how to like, be healthier, fitter, work out more, do that kind of stuff. And I was like, just kind of trying stuff out. And I removed gluten for a month, and I lost some weight. I think I lost like probably 10 pounds over a month, which is,
Yeah, that's a
but
lot.
I didn't realize how much better I was feeling until
Yep.
I tried eating it again.
Yep.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm not bloated anymore. I have like, pardon this, but we're getting personal, like better bowel movements.
Right.
I was feeling less brain fog, like all of these things. So I ended up taking it out completely. And I've unfortunately been glutened, I like to say, a few times since accidentally,
Yeah.
and then I'll have some headaches and joint pain and stomach issues for a day or two. But, it was just like one of those things where once I realized what my life was like without it, I don't want it anymore.
Right.
And so I think of this, like once you realize sort of the puzzle pieces of your template or your body's operating system is what you said,
Right.
then you can kind of like know those things ahead of time and have sort of a better starting point than where I was just, I'm just going to remove it and see what happens.
Absolutely. And like you said, like kind of the side effect of it was losing 10 pounds.
Yeah.
So it just shows how much more effective your body can operate without it if that's a problem for you. And really, in the United States, because we have so much gluten, because we eat so much processed food, it's really, it's not a beneficial source of any type of food science for anybody. But when people compare, like, well, I went to Italy for the summer and I ate pasta twice a day and I didn't gain any weight. In fact, I lost weight. I'm like, because they don't use gluten. The gluten is what allows the things in the grocery store to outlive us. They're going to live forever on the shelf, right? So, but if you really have a gluten sensitivity, like we'll see when we take a look at yours, that it's going to have even more of an impact.
Right.
And then I would just want to thank you, Nick, for doing this, because you having you're a public figure, and doing this really makes other people say, wow, if Nick will share his information, it takes away any stigma. No one has a perfect genome. Nobody, regardless of people want to tell you how perfect they are, right? Nobody does. But what we have to find out is, where are the errors or the variants in your coding? And more importantly, what do those errors do to you? That's what's important.
Yeah. And what I like about your approach here, and we were not recording when I said this, but I just had my like yearly exam last week, and my doctor offered me like just general blood work test.
Right.
And it was just going to kind of like identify things. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm actually probably not going to do that, because I'm going to do this.
Right.
And this is going to identify things and then like give me ways to address it.
Exactly.
As opposed to just, the example I use, you're low on vitamin D, take a vitamin D supplement. Well, great. But like, what am I going to notice is different? What is that? Like, what if it doesn't do anything? What if it does too much? Like, there's no like roadmap for it. And that's what I think is so great about something like this.
Exactly. There are other companies who have popped up, not as inclusive with what we look at. And, like I'll use an example. They were around before, but 23andMe, when people would say, well, I do or I don't have the MTHFR gene for methylation, right? And we'll talk about what that means. But that's one gene. We're looking at 14 just in that category. So that could be somewhat misleading information to say you don't have any problem with methylating while it's one gene. We're looking at 14.
Yeah, wow, that's a good point.
And beyond that, companies will be like, okay, you need to get out and exercise more. Those are the lifestyle parts that they just say, here's what you need to do. We'll talk about the lifestyle parts because they are important, but they're different for each individual.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
We go over everyone's results just like we are here with you today, Nick, because it is individual. That's the whole reason we're doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is great. So I'm going to share my screen. So here's what I want to say. If you're listening to this on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast, if you want to follow along with the reports, hop over to YouTube. The episode with video is on YouTube. The link is down in the show notes. Otherwise, you can obviously keep listening. But if you want to see the report and kind of walk through some of it, if you're visual like I am, then you'll want to check that out. But otherwise, should I share my screen here?
Sure.
Which one should I open up? I have two. I have the Wired for Biohealth evaluation report, and I have the Wired Biohealth pathway support plan recommendations.
So the evaluation. So we're going to be looking at the individual genes. Yep.
Share my screen. So I don't think I've ever shared a screen on here before. So let's make sure I do this the right way. Like, what am I sharing?
Nick. We're sharing a screen.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to make this bigger for myself. Can you see this okay?
I can see it.
Okay. All right.
And if you want to make it bigger, great.
Yeah, I'll make it a little bit bigger. How do I do that? It's not letting me do that. Oh, hold on. I actually have to do it on the screen. This is like me in a Teams meeting at work trying to figure it out.
You can believe it.
All right, here we go. Now I can make it bigger here.
Okay, cool.
And does that look big enough, you think?
Yep, I think
Perfect.
So.
All right. So I've got to navigate it from here. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So let's go to the next page there. And the first category, what we're going to look at are inflammatory markers. So you see green, you see yellow, and you see red results. So each one of these are particular genetic genes. And a green reading means we had no clinical abnormality within that gene. Red means it was heterozygous, meaning one in the pair have a variant or an error. And when it's red, it means that both in the pair have an error or a variant. So that just means that it's not coded the way it's intended to be, and we have a variant of that or an error of that gene. Okay? So we look at inflammatory markers because they have everything to do with our health, right? If there's inflammation within your body, eventually we're going to wind up with conditions or disease states. So if we know this to begin with, we can really prevent so much from happening. So that first gene, C3, so this is essential for the immune response. This kind of kicks everything off. And when we see a polymorphism here, meaning an error, mutation, or a polymorphism, we see a greater susceptibility to asthma, and we see other inflammatory disorders. And you have a homozygous result. So both of those genes have to do with a potential problem that could happen there.
And is that is asthma specifically related to that one, or is that just an example of like an inflammatory?
It's specific, and it can be others.
Okay.
Have either of those things ever been an issue for you, Nick?
So I don't have asthma. I would say I do get ironically, I do get like chest inflammation pretty regularly. Like I have it right now, and I'm not sick. I had a cold maybe 6 weeks ago, but I'll get like that. I do think I see on the right, I do have sort of like this, I'm trying to eat less processed foods and eat more like meats and vegetables and like fresh food and stuff like that, because I'm coming to terms with my age, which is 39, as you can see up there. And like, I want to start taking care of myself now. Absolutely. So that's interesting to see that. Yeah.
And then the next one, CD14. So this is the initiator of the whole immune response for your body. And it's necessary for potential pathogens that we have this working properly, and can make us, again, more susceptible to asthma or any other kind of allergen-mediated inflammatory responses. So, and that's a homozygous result. So it would make sense with the chest stuff that you're talking about.
You know, this time of year in the winter, someone told me what this was one time. I don't really remember, but like I do kind of feel like I get winter allergies, not summer allergies.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's
Sure.
something.
No, an inflammatory response, definitely. Yeah. And then that IL-5 or interleukin-5, we have a heterozygous, so one in the pair is affected. This can make you more susceptible to certain viral infections and an increased aggression of an inflammatory response.
Okay.
So if people have a cold, if people have a virus, does it usually affect you of people that you're around, or do you leave like, no, dodge that?
So I used to get everything everyone around me had, but since I've been supplementing, especially during COVID,
Yep.
I have not. I think I had COVID twice, but I was like the last person I know to get it, and I didn't get it very bad. The second time I was testing negative in like 4 days, but I've really focused on like getting my vitamins in order and again starting to eat better and exercise regularly, stuff like that, to try and, again, like I didn't obviously know these results, but to try and like not be sick, because I used to get sick all the time and I felt like I always got like the worst symptoms of it.
That's exactly why. That's
Okay.
exactly why. So then we look at IL-4, interleukin-4. We have normal risk, no problems, no clinical abnormality. Then IL-13, interleukin-13, we have a heterozygous result. So this can create an increase in the risk of more severe inflammatory responses to any kind of allergens, kind of the stuff that just someone else is exposed to it. There might be some coughing, there might be some lung stuff going on, but then they get over it. An intense response is like, whoa, like what's going on here? And it just doesn't leave us.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like being sick longer almost if you do catch something. Yeah.
That response just kind of takes off and doesn't, when your body is being invaded by a pathogen, the army cells come in and they say, okay, we've got to fight. But then they also have to know it's time to retreat.
To stop, yeah.
And if you're in this spiral, your body is just always ready to fight. And that's how we wind up autoimmune diseases, conditions, things like that, because your body's always responding to an invader and the invader's not there anymore.
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay.
Spirals out of control. Then that IL-23R, homozygous result. So this has to do with Crohn's disease. So that kind of, what we were talking about earlier before, not meaning that you're going to have Crohn's disease, but it's linked to that. And then the STAT4, we have no clinical abnormality. The IL-6 or interleukin-6, we have.
So the ones that are green, like let's do the STAT4. What would be something that's a benefit to being green there? Like what is not happening that would be happening if I was yellow or red?
Okay, so we would look at specific inflammatory diseases or responses like lupus, like rheumatoid arthritis.
Which runs in my family.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, then the TNF, no clinical abnormality, tumor necrosis factor, so you're good to go there. But if we had a polymorphism, we could see a more severe pro-inflammatory response to what's happening in your body, and that would require some type of inflammatory control. So you think about the relationship between different kinds of cancers and tumors. If we're always in this spiral of inflammation, that has a lot to do with down the road different types of cancers developing. So,
and maybe you can comment on this. I've noticed recently, because I follow a lot of health influencers, a lot of doctors on social media. I listen to a lot of podcasts with doctors and specialists, and inflammation is a topic that seems to really have taken off recently, where people are actually in public talking about the role of inflammation in disease. So for the common person who doesn't proactively go learn, what can inflammation in general do to your body long term?
Great question. So cancers, cardiovascular disease, even diabetes. So 3 big killers of people, top of the list kind of things. And had I said that to somebody 15 years ago, they'd be like, yeah, I don't think so. Or else there would be a drug out there for it. It's
Right.
like now people have access to information and they're kind of sifting through the, what's going on. It's a big factor in those three diseases.
Yeah.
People are even now describing, I love this term, inflammation, having to do with aging, inflammaging,
Yep.
because it is going to shorten our telomeres, which are the part that allow us to extend our lives. We can measure that on a DNA strand. And knowing that it's shortening our life, well, those are three really big diseases of what shortens people's lives, right? So we think cancers, we think cardiovascular, even diabetes, and bringing in the diabetes part to this. And as we go through it, it's going to make more sense. We now know that the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immunological system all actually act as a super system. They're not all independent. Right. And that's how we used to think of everything. Why? Because we want you take this for this, take this for this. And then it started like, whoa, this is really a problem.
Well, then take this because this and this interact with each
Bingo.
other. You don't, yeah.
Bingo, right? And I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. I'll put that out there now.
Me neither.
What I am is go the conservative route first, because we're not going to have a negative side effect to that.
Yeah.
And doesn't it make sense? There's not a single cell in your body made up of a pharmaceutical. Yet that becomes the answer to everything. It's like, just think about that statement. It's like, whoa, what? Yeah, you're right, right? So why would we take something that has nothing to do with the cell we're trying to change and have react differently as our first line of defense? If we've done everything conservatively and we're still not there, yes, let's go for it. The purpose of pharmaceuticals was to save lives, but unfortunately, we abuse them.
Yeah, I agree. And uniquely in this country, I worked for a Swedish company, and I got and I have friends in Europe. I've gotten to travel to all sorts of European countries. They do things so differently over there when it comes to pharmaceuticals. And I even have this whole idea that because we're so reliant on them in this country, that even the other countries get to pay less for it because we pay so much for it here. It's just there's so many things that we could be doing to address symptoms and address cause, or not just address symptoms, address the cause relation to it. And I would love to see more conversations like this with doctors, as opposed to, let me prescribe you a pill that's going to help, alleviate a symptom.
Right. And it's okay, this is your symptom. But if we figure out the why behind your symptom, we can backtrack and create a plan instead of a Band-Aid that may or may not help and probably is going to have another side effect, creating something else, like liver, bladder, kidneys, everything you're taking, those organs have to process.
Yeah, that's true.
So if we are, the average 60-year-old is on like 13 different pharmaceuticals. So at that point, it's like, what are you doing to your liver, your kidneys, your bladder? If those are necessary for life saving and sustaining, I'm all in.
Yeah.
But if we can do it another way, doesn't it make sense? And this is exactly what we're doing with looking at this, finding out the why, your unique why.
Yeah.
Not the guy that was before you and the guy that's after you in the doctor's office. Here, take this. And
or the people that were in the studies who are, random and
exactly. And Europe does a much better job at looking at the purity.
Yeah.
Of even their supplements. There's anybody could go and say, here's my supplement.
Yeah.
Right. But is it a pharmaceutical grade? Not meaning that it has pharmaceuticals in it, but does it go through the same strict regimen to be created?
Yeah.
Right. And then what's the dosing of it? You could say it's a vitamin C. It could be 1% vitamin C, 99% filler. The toxins in the filler is worse than the 1% because they're selling it to you for such a cheap, here, buy 10 of them.
Yep. And you find things like rice flour in them, that's a filler, but people don't. This is the other thing. Like the supplement industry is so unregulated. You really got to do a lot of research to find out if it's a good one or not. It's not an easy thing.
Absolutely.
I remember I had a company that reached out to me over the summer, I think it was, and they were interested in helping me start a supplement company on supplements that support mental health. And in theory, I like that, but there's not a lot of research to back this kind of stuff.
Yep.
is so different, but there's not a lot of like general research to say, this type of supplement helps with this. And to me, it's like, again, I supplement a lot, but I do a lot of research, or sometimes I have a person who's in charge of the supplement company, founder, on this show, and I'll like ask them questions about their process and stuff like that, and find out if it's something that'll work for me. So I love that element of it, where you have to understand the quality is important, and not ingesting stuff full of fillers and other things that you really don't need and actually could be further hindering your issues.
Absolutely. Yep. That's just as important as everything else.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that we do after we have someone's results. Okay, what's the dosing even of what they need? It's not just the next guy, but what are we looking at as we look at all these layers of what's happening with you, uniquely you? What's the dosing we need to recommend, right? So it's all part of it. Okay, then the IDO1. We had a heterozygous result. So this is an enzyme that plays a role in a lot of pathophysiological processes, such as neuropathology and immunoregulation. So just talking about the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, how they all tie in together. So really important.
So what I'm missing one of them there, right? So
right. So one of them is a variant. So it's It's the wrong plug and play of what should be there.
Okay.
So then IL-2 or interleukin-2. And this is a heterozygous result. This is going to create a robust inflammatory response. It could create severe allergies. It could even create bowel inflammation.
Oh, okay.
So that's important for a lot of people. Like early on, you're like, I don't know if this is TMI, but talking about a bowel movement is such an important part of looking at and understanding what the health of an individual is. Because if you're not removing toxins from your body, and that's what's in a bowel movement, it's the nutrients have been used up. Now we're getting rid of everything else that your body doesn't need. We have to get rid of that.
Yeah.
That's
the thing with like, my stomach is the first thing that gets upset with anything. If from stress to anxiety to even like I have stomach issues when I get a cold. Like it's the first thing that kind of tells me something isn't right. And I think I can tell from that, like on a daily basis, what's going on. So I think I know people who like they don't have like regular bowel movements and stuff like that. Is that related to this?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then we get into the neuropsych genes and the amount of anxiety somebody has. Can be so many other layers to it. We're going to talk about autophagy, kind of like the garbage man of the cells. Are we having problems there removing garbage? So it's not just one thing. And that's kind of where we started with like a company that's coming out with, here, look at this, it's like, no. That's actually dangerous information. It's misleading.
Yeah. The misleading piece. That's what I think so many of us just get misled because you use the vitamin D example. I have low vitamin D. Well, supplement it. Okay. Well, am I doing the right amount? Like, what are the impacts? Is it actually helping? It's all like in a silo. It's useless. It's just useless information.
Exactly. It's useless information. Yep. And I think with people educating themselves more and requiring more information and better information and not standing for the old answer, it's really helped in a lot of those ways.
I think so too. And I think that's one of the good things the last few years, I think that's come out of the internet is people waking up to this health stuff, both mental, physical, and the intersections of them, where this information just wasn't available before social media.
No way. And even just having, medical publications that the average person wouldn't be able to read that, but it's available. You couldn't even have access to that if you weren't a physician.
That's crazy.
That's
I didn't
crazy,
even think of that.
Right? You still want the physician because they're the guiding, factor in all this, but you want to know it's your body. What's going on with me? What do I need to really brush up on? What do I need to know? And then be able to ask the educated questions as a result of that.
Exactly. And then you're not just trusting blindly. You're actually, the point of this show, don't go through life blind, go through the world with your eyes wide open, so you can have an intelligent conversation and ask the right questions.
Right, right. Which, by the way, is a great name and a great premise of, isn't, if we all really took the name of your show and said, wow, how much of my life do I go through with blinders on and accept it? But then I get upset if the result isn't what I want it to be. Right. So eyes wide open, like, So very cool.
Yeah. It's changed my perspective. I mean, it having this as sort of my mantra, like I even have a tattoo of it on my arm now too. So it's really a good mantra for people to sort of approach things with, in my view.
And you look at, from what you were telling me about the reality show and how your life changed from that, and then what you did to make something good out of that situation, right? You probably may have not ended up in that place of like, what am I really seeing here with a different lens, right? So
I've always been a skeptic too, which is funny considering I grew up like very Catholic, where you, as a young Catholic boy going to a Catholic school, being part of the church, like there's not a lot of room for skepticism, but somewhere along the way, I discovered this like just level of skepticism with everything I see and everything I hear, where I ask myself, like, does this make sense to me? Like, does this actually make sense to me? Do I have questions instead of just going with it? And ironically, I've told this story on here before, but my uncle, who's a priest, a Catholic priest, he and I went to Six Flags Great America amusement park here. I think I was in 8th grade, or I think I was actually a freshman in high school. And he and I went, and when you walk into the park, you go right or you go left, and it goes in a circle. So you can kind of hit. So I'm following the crowd going right. And he's like, whoa, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I'm going. He's like, everyone goes right, you go left. And then you go left because you're thinking to yourself, oh, why is everyone going right? And then if we go left, he's like, we will have shorter lines. We'll get on more rides because we'll be doing the park the opposite way. He's like, you got to think like that sometimes. If everyone's going right, you got to wonder why no one's going left and what are the benefits of going left. And that stuck with me to this day. And I always think about that when I get information of any kind. I'm like, how do I actually feel about this? Does this make sense to me? And then validate it or question it. And so I think if we question more as individuals, whether it be about our health, about what we're told in the news, what we're told at work, and you critically think a little bit about it and see if it actually makes sense to you, we would all be so much better off.
Absolutely. And then, on the better off part, also be more content with yourself.
Yes.
Because you've thought through all these processes.
Yes.
And you feel like you are part of the decision of where you wind up, not just forced to be that's where I wound up because of all these other outside influences.
Well, I think too, like before, when I was younger in my 20s, and probably maybe early 30s, I always felt like the world was happening to me and I wasn't an active participant in it.
Yeah.
And then I kind of like changed my mindset. I was like, things are going to happen, but how do I react to those things?
Yeah.
And that's going to be what really changes things. So even a couple years ago after the show, and my whole life was a mess, and I started getting these feelings again, like I'm out of control in my life. I was like, no, I'm not. And I just grabbed it figuratively. And I was like, no, like, yes, these bad things are happening, but how I choose to respond to them is going to be the indicator of who I am and how I show up in the world. Absolutely. And when everything goes wrong and everything happens, if I take on that victim mentality, I'm going to end up in the exact same spot I worked so hard to get out of when I was younger. And I'm not going backwards.
Right. Looking at the, what do I have control over?
Yes.
And what decision do I have control over? And taking from that, okay, this is my decision. And the other stuff that you don't have any control over, okay, it's out of your hands. Yep. But what I can work on is this, and there's strength in that. There's empowerment in that.
Exactly. And so when doing something like this, taking this biomarker test, I've said this before, I've come to terms a little bit with like mortality's real, not because anything horrible has happened that I'm dying, but I actually had a hip injury that like had gotten pretty bad. And I recently, it's actually another podcast episode about stem cells. Yeah. So like I did a stem cell treatment on it to avoid surgery. Mm-hmm. And this is that whole hip thing was like figuratively, obviously, like, people joke about as you get older, your hips go, right? Like, that's, I fell and broke my hip. And I started thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, like, I am getting older, but like, I want to take care of myself now.
Right.
Like, and I've always kind of taken care of myself, but like, I'm going to get real about this kind of stuff and preventative healthcare and optimization so that, you know, and I think about too, I'm like, I'm almost 40. I still want to have a family. Like,
Yep.
I don't want to like be 65 and not able to like play with my 20-year-old kid, hopefully at that point. But you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think about these things, and these are the types of things that I think we can do as individuals to really sort of optimize and do preventative healthcare, preventative maintenance,
Yep.
and, you know, make our longevity, both mentally and physically, more possible.
Prevention is the name of the game. That's the game changer, you know, and that's why the biomarkers are so important in what we do, because it literally changes someone's life. It really changes their experience in life, their outcome in life. And all of this gives hope, because it's not just random willy-nilly. My mom had this, my dad had this, forget it, I'm going to die by, 50. It's like, no, we're going to see in your genes, if that's an issue, but we're going to have a way to change the expression of that gene. Yes. So that gone are the days of woe is me. It should offer so much hope to someone.
Yeah. I agree.
It really does.
I'm writing that down because I'm going to clip that for social media.
Okay, cool. So then we have the SOCS1. We have a homozygous result there. And that's a suppressor of the cytokine signaling. So cytokine, when your body is being invaded, it creates a cytokine storm and your whole body is on red alert. Well, we have to be able to turn that down. Right, we can't stay on red alert, so it's needed to curb that pro-inflammatory signaling. So if we have a mutation here, it's going to create this prolonged inflammatory response. We can't stay in that. That's when, like I said earlier, that's when we start to see autoimmune diseases, the cancers, the cardiovascular, because you can't stay with this immune inflammatory thing going on. It's going to require us to control it some way.
Okay. This is interesting.
Yeah. And then the CTLA4, that's a heterozygous result. So this is related to a host of diseases that are related to the heightened immune state, again, talking about the cancers, the cardiovascular. And then the DRD2, you're good to go, no clinical abnormality, but this would have to do with the dopamine receptor. And that's a really important component.
Oh, interesting.
Neuroinflammation.
So with the dope, so if I had a yellow or a red here, would that mean I have problem processing dopamine?
Well, it would create a more inflammatory response there, but we will specifically look at the genes related to either breaking down dopamine or not being able to make enough dopamine. And then we start talking about the mental health parts and the addiction parts, and all of this is so vital for someone to understand in the mental health space. So vital.
So this one particularly, is this related highly to addiction? So I'm less likely to have addictive qualities to stuff because
of this particular.
That's interesting because I've always... So like I drink a lot of coffee, but I like coffee. It's not for the caffeine. If I don't have coffee, like yesterday, I had half the amount of coffee I usually do. I didn't even notice it. It was just the nature of it being Thanksgiving. But like I can stop drinking coffee and like have no response at all. As an example of like addiction, like I don't even get a headache. I just,
Yeah, that's great.
I've always thought like, I don't think I'm just, because there's other things I probably in my 20s could have been an alcoholic if I wasn't careful, and I can just stop. Like I can just stop for a month, like nothing.
And that's where knowing, like using that example, there's different ways. Like someone, if they have genes related to addiction, which we'll get to that part, that they're going to be more susceptible. Whereas someone else, you could still wind up an addict because you're using every day, and your body's operating system starts to say, "I need this to exist." Even if you didn't have those genes, you were just, be like
a habitual thing turns into.
Exactly. Where mom and dad are like, be careful of who you hang out with. Be careful of your environment, right? That's where all that comes from, because anything, we do it long enough, it's going to become habitual, and we're going to operate by those things in our lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's when
What?
also the layers of it, the complication. It's the DRD2, a part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah.
We've got to keep on digging and then to know how do these things interact together.
I'm going to do dry January, so we'll see if I can actually
Oh,
stick.
very cool. Yeah,
stick
yeah,
to
very
it.
cool. And that's taken on more and more of a sociably acceptable tool for people.
Absolutely.
Great.
Nobody bats an eye. So my one of my best friend actually, who he is in recovery for alcoholism, and the amount of because we obviously, if we go out or we hang out, there's non-alcoholic options everywhere now. There's whole menus for it's so
Yep.
good to see,
Really
because
is.
that wasn't the case even 5 years ago.
No way.
It was so socially unacceptable to go out and not have a drink.
Right. Yeah.
Without
You have
guilt.
to make up lies like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm on antibiotics, or, people were making up stories because it was like, well, why won't you?
Yep.
Instead of just, that's my choice, or it's a problem for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that's changed, and I've gotten to kind of see that firsthand.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the drinks really are good.
Oh my gosh, I know. I've had some of them.
Yeah.
When you can make a perfectly normal tasting cocktail without
Right.
any alcohol now.
Yep. And it allows people to have that socialization that they want to.
Exactly.
Because that living in isolation is not good for anybody. And,
No.
You look at how isolation has been used in history. It's used in warfare to kill somebody. It's used in
reality TV to manipulate people.
There you go, right?
Yep.
Isolation. It's like, if you don't play along by the rules, we're going to put you in timeout, and you're going to get really in your head, and it's not going to go well.
Yeah. And that's what happened during COVID for a lot of people. I know so many people that developed anxiety and depression and stuff just because that they never had any symptoms before or anything serious. And then
Right.
that isolation and being forced to kind of sit with your thoughts and not get physical touch or human interactions. It's
Right.
so
Yeah.
important.
So
And that's why our Surgeon General said loneliness is an epidemic at this point.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it is. You look at, talking about alcohol, the fastest growing sector is in the retired population, because they no longer have a purpose of, I have work, I have to take care of a family, whatever their purpose was, is now for a lot of them removed. And they don't have the same ability to go out and make new buddies with people. You're not in those environments that make it easy to be like, hey man, what's going on? Let's go hang out. It's harder. And alcohol becomes the buddy.
Yeah. It's sad.
Yeah. Okay, so then in the next category, we're still talking about inflammatory markers, but this time having to do with your external environment and how that affects you.
Should I change, or are we still on this screen?
So next screen.
Okay.
Next screen. Yep.
I got to switch. Okay.
There you go.
Perfect.
So the NOS2, nitric oxide synthase. And we had a heterozygous result there. So this has to do with an increased activity promoting more inflammation. Okay. So this is from an external reason rather than an internal reason, like we were looking at in the first part. And then we get to the histamine intolerance. So histamine, a lot having to do with allergies, asthma, that kind of thing. AOC1, no clinical abnormality. Then we had HNMT, we had a heterozygous result. So this has to do with a poor ability to break down histamine. So it's more difficult for your body to encounter histamine.
What is can you define histamine? I kind of know what it is.
So histamine is what creates the response in our body to say, whoa, there's too much stimulation here, right?
Okay. That's why Benadryl is an antihistamine, because it's
correct.
Okay, got it. Okay.
You got it. So it's going to then create a prolonged inflammatory effect because of this histamine signaling and a poor breakdown of the histamine.
Okay.
And then it's required to have a complete methylation pathway to function normally. And we're going to talk about methylation as a whole other subject within itself. And then the NMT on a different part of the gene, no problem there. This was your best area
Okay.
The external inflammatory markers. The HLA-DQA1 having to do with gluten sensitivity can create a higher risk. You felt the effects, and you shared with us what that was like for you.
I can't wait, because for 10, 11 years now, I've been getting, are you celiac? Well, have you ever been tested?
Right.
And I'm like, I just feel better when I don't eat it. Now I can say, I've been tested. I'm at high risk with gluten sensitivity. Leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. We're good. And then the FUT2, this has to do with producing specific sugar groups. So sugar is secreted by the intestinal cell into the bowel of the purpose of creating good bacteria. We have good bacteria, we have bad bacteria within us. We have to have more of the good guys. So if we don't have enough, we get that gut dysbiosis. That creates havoc from the beginning to the end of our bodies. Because you even think about the neurotransmitters, serotonin. 90% of serotonin is made in your gut. Right. So if you have an imbalance, a gut dysbiosis, you're not going to be making enough serotonin. Serotonin is that feel good neurotransmitter. That's the purpose of SSRIs, right? Antidepressants. So you see how you can't just look at one little piece and say, oh, that's it. We have to look at everything and how it interacts. And then if we have a polymorphism in this particular FUT2, it's going to not create enough of the good bacteria. So
is this saying that I don't have a problem producing serotonin?
This is saying that you're making enough of the good bacteria.
Okay, gotcha.
We'll talk about the serotonin by itself. I just use that example of how there's these different pieces of, maybe you have one in the whole piece of the pie, but are there other layers to it?
Got it. Okay.
We can't look at it in isolation. And then let's flip to the next page. So this is still the environmental inflammatory responses and biomarkers. And this one, the ITGB3, you have a homozygous result. So both of the genes are affected. This is going to make you have an increased risk of being around mold. Okay. So someone else could say, like, say you're traveling, you walk into a hotel room, you're like, man, it kind of smells in here a little bit. Does it smell off to you? And, the other person may say yes or no. And the other person may be like, no big deal. Someone with a polymorphism here would get sick.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time to get past that, whereas somebody else in the same environment doesn't get sick.
That's interesting.
Yep. So you start looking at the whys behind all this stuff. Why do you get that way? Why does that happen? Whether it be your mental health, why does that happen? Whether it be, why do you react that way to mold? But what's that going to do? It's going to take all those inflammatory markers we just talked about. It's going to heighten all of them. And then we're going to get to the neuropsych genes here and say, wow, are we more prone to anxiety or depression? You were in that mold environment. You really reacted poorly back then. Now, like, I'm seeing this, you staying in this heightened state of anxiety. This is why all these pieces matter.
Yeah.
Right. So then we look at vitamin D transport. And you talking about, your doctor's like, well, let's look at vitamin D, and funny enough, even 15 years ago, if you asked, like, let's do quarterly looking at your vitamin D, why? Physicians would be like, I'm ordering it, telling the patient, like, make sure you get it done quarterly or else we'll get it done here, but do it with your PCP. They said that I don't need it that often. You do. Yeah. That's why you go from barely normal range to in the tank again. And they're saying, well, I'm taking this supplement because you're not looking at the why it's not working. And if somebody has, like you do, a homozygous result in that VDR, just sunlight is not going to be enough. And then
we as in America specifically, but like, we are so vitamin D deficient,
right?
Especially me in the Midwest here. Like, I try to go on a 20-minute walk every morning, no matter what. It's 28 degrees today. It's actually sunny. Well, it's not anymore. It was sunny. Yeah. And so I'm bundled up. I'm doing that walk just to try and get that sunlight while, we've got just a few hours of it.
Yep.
But
Yep.
even that, okay, so that's part of it, but it's not going to be enough alone.
Right. And that's great. And you should be doing that because there's other reasons for doing that too. Like getting the sunlight as soon as you wake up, really important because it gets that circadian rhythm, that normal 24 hours. The light comes into your eyes. It says, I'm awake. It's going to be better for you to go to sleep at night in a more restful state if you do that initial sunlight.
Exactly. I've been swearing on that for like 2 years when I first learned about that from Dr. Andrew Huberman on his podcast.
There you go.
And then I talk about it on social media all the time because I don't think people really know stuff like this. And it's not common with your doctor to say, oh, make sure you get sunlight in the morning so that you regulate your circadian rhythm. You start regulating your cortisol, all of that stuff, as opposed to, and especially now, people roll out of bed, go because they work from home and they go sit at their computer. And I have a dog, so I don't have a choice. But if you don't, it's easy to just not get any of that sunlight.
Big time. And then in the winter, especially where you are, Nick, that the sunlight isn't as intense as it is in the summer, so there's much limited time for even exposure to it. But when we look at like that VDR, that you've got a homozygous reaction there. So this TAC vitamin D receptor creates an activation or a deactivation of the protein production by the cell, right? So if we have a deactivation here, we're going to create significant immune weakness. So you think now about, because there's been so much more research done, for example, on breast cancer and the relationship with vitamin D. This is a big part of it, a significant immune weakness, and that creates an increased cancer risk.
Wow.
Right? And then even as much as like early bone loss or an increased risk of cognitive decline and mood disorders. Why? Because what's a hack for serotonin? Go get sunlight. Right? So you put all this stuff together and you start to see where it comes from and why, and it actually does make sense. And vitamin D is in almost every biochemical reaction in our body. So if we're not having vitamin D, we're not going to reach the optimal level for that reaction, whatever it is. It's that important, and it's such a simple fix.
And I think I saw something recently that there's like new studies showing that the majority of, I forget what kind of cancer, it wasn't breast cancer, but it was another kind of cancer. And they were finding trends of significantly lowered vitamin D levels from where they have to be.
Yep.
So you saying it kind of hits everything in the body in different ways. Like if we don't get vitamin D, it's almost like a foundational thing. It sounds like
it is a foundational thing. It really is. It has to happen. It's part of so many pathways. It has to happen. So someone says, well, your doctor says, go on 2000 IUs of vitamin D. If you've got this, that's probably not even going to be enough for you. But what are the other elements of it? That's why so often D3 is taken with K2 because it's a cofactor for making it work. Goes back to what are the supplements that you're actually taking? Are they junk? Or are they used for medicinal purposes?
Mine, I hope, isn't junk, but it is D3 and K2, and it's a little dropper. I put it in my protein shake every day.
Good.
Like
there you go.
2-3 drops too, which is 2-3 more than you're supposed to. But
yeah. So then on the next page.
All right, let's move along.
Okay, so now we're talking about mitochondria as the category. So mitochondria, like 8th grade biology, the powerhouse of your cell, right? And kids are like, what does that actually mean? That's the only thing I remember. What does that mean, right? So that's where we create energy. Our mitochondria have to be functioning optimally to create energy. You think about what happens if we don't create energy, a lot of bad things, but eventually death. Without energy, you cease to exist. So that's how important it is, but it's just for every pathway to exist optimally, we have to be making energy, right? So it's vital. So that first one, the SIRT1, the SIRT1, you have a homozygous result. So this is sirtuin, and it encodes something called NAD gene. So nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. This is an enzyme needed for the mitochondria to work efficiently. So it creates ATP, it creates energy as the end result. If we have any type of polymorphism in this SIRT1, we can see an increased risk of obesity, an increased BMI. So is this something we need to know even before we're putting people on all of these diet drugs and everything else? Heck yeah. The question that when I saw your results, I was like, I have to ask Nick if, as a kid, were you ever heavy? Did you ever struggle with your weight?
I did struggle with my weight. I
There you
struggle
go.
with it to this day. My family is very overweight. I'm probably the only fit person.
Okay.
And I've always been at this battle. I always say against genetics, I can work out more, eat better than people I know that are jacked.
Yep. That's exactly why.
And I've always had a high BMI too.
Yeah. So
even if I was skinny, I'd have a high BMI.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely struggled with my weight. I still, like I said, I struggle if I'm not careful. If I don't work out for a week and I don't watch what I eat, I'll easily blow up 10 pounds.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, easily. It's happened before when I get depressed. Yeah.
This is exactly why. Yeah. Do you have difficulty making yourself exercise? Do you get tired easily?
Not anymore but I have times where I do, but I work out. I force myself for several years now to be very consistent. Even to the point where, so now I box 3 times a week, which has been great. And then I lift weights 4 times a week.
Great.
But before, and this has just been for probably the last year, but before that I would mix in yoga and stuff that I would like to do. But sometimes I would just go to the gym and have a horrible workout because I was tired, but I wanted to keep in the habit of it.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I didn't, then I would kind of slowly fade. But I not as much now, to answer your question, because I've been so consistent that it's become a part of really how I function and the structure that keeps me sane.
Yeah. So this gives a lot of validity to, those struggles that you've had. This is exactly why.
And I think a lot of people have those.
Yeah. And the power of the information. Okay, then what are we going to do to create more energy from the mitochondria? But it all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the next one where we had a problem, the TFAM, we had a homozygous result. So this creates a reduced exercise endurance capacity. So that's why I asked that follow-up question. And,
now that you mention it, sometimes I do feel like I get tired quick.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I really if it's later in the day, especially after work, if I'm working out.
Yeah.
I do sometimes get really tired really quickly.
And the push, some people
my muscles do.
Yeah. Got to push yourself and I'm just wiped out. It's not being, lazy. It's your mitochondria is struggling to be able to do that.
That's interesting.
And we now know that, because there's so much focus on longevity, that this can actually decrease longevity because, again, I go back to if the mitochondria aren't efficient and optimal, we don't have enough energy for our cells to operate. Eventually, they cease to exist, and that can be a shorter lifespan for somebody. That's important information.
Yeah, so this is probably a really important one for me, considering what I shared earlier about really trying to build myself for longevity as opposed to surviving.
Exactly. And those numbers that are circulating around we can live to 120 years old. And I do a lot of talk about the blue zones where more centenarians, right? People live to be 100 or more in these 6 different areas of the world, and what their secrets are there. That exercise piece is always in these communities. It's
and they move. It isn't even like they're at the gym. They move their bodies.
There's no gyms in these places. Yeah. It's all just part of their everyday activity. The latest one, actually, what became the 6th, is Singapore, and that is a place where there's gyms. But all the other places, Caria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Loma Linda, California. There's gyms, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's how they live their lives, right? Yeah. And knowing that piece of it. So talking about, people can now live to 120, but we have more people dying earlier than ever because of cardiovascular disease, because of diabetes, because of these things that are preventive. That's where there's power in this information.
And we can't live such sedentary lifestyles.
Right, can't.
I force myself virtually every day to get at least 15,000 steps.
Yep.
And it starts with that morning walk. And it's when it's cold and I can't get outside, I will walk around I have an open floor plan, so it's easy for me. But like, we got to move our bodies.
Absolutely.
So much more than we do.
Absolutely. And, and you think back to, well, why do we have so many more diseases now? People ate more fat. They ate more this, that earlier. Well, people moved their bodies all day, every day for the work that they did. We got to doing desk work and it all changed.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's even going to protect against that oxidative stress. So that mitochondria is really, really, really important. And then the CoQ10, another area, subset of the mitochondria, the NQO1, we had a heterozygous result. So this is a riboflavin-dependent enzyme, or B2, and it protects against oxidative stress. So then oxidative stress itself, we had the SOD2, heterozygous result. This has to do with the mitochondria matrix, we call it, and it creates an increased oxidative stress, creating an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. So you look at how do all these things tie in, just what we're talking about. You start to see all these pieces coming together. So then on the next page under methylation is a huge, really important part of what has to happen optimally in your body. And out of all of this stuff, that's probably the biggest buzz on the internet. People talking about, but they talk about one gene, the MTFR gene. That's one gene. And that's where I talk about, that can become almost dangerous because it's one gene, not all of it. But it's such a complex cycle. There's two parts of it. There's the folate metabolism part. There's the B12 part. But if I were to summarize, what does all of it mean? 3 really important things that methylation does. One is it optimizes your DNA. Right there, we need to be methylating. Right?
And I am not, it looks like, with the yellow and the red.
Right. We're going to talk about that. But then it allows us to detoxify. Your body should, if it's operating correctly, be able to detoxify every day on its own, with the hardest work being done by the liver between like 2 and 4 a.m., which is so important of why we should be sleeping then, because it allows our body to do these functions. And then thirdly, to absorb nutrients. We could be eating a perfect diet, but if we're not absorbing, we're not getting the nutrients we need for any of this to work, right? So we look at methylation. The first problematic area was at FOLR2, where we had a heterozygous result. This creates a poor methylation due to poor delivery of folic acid. And then the DFR and the MTH.
What is folic acid?
So folic acid is one of the B vitamins that has to be, but people saying like, I just take folic acid. Okay. Why? Because, whatever I did or whatever I figured out myself for methylation, I think it's going to help it. Okay, that's good. But we're not looking at how it all interacts together. That's really where the information starts to get so important. So that DHFR creates a methylation deficiency and also an MTHFR mutation. And then a homozygous as well in the MTHFS. It's a poor utilization of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. So those pieces there alone, like the folic acid, how do we improve on our folic acid? Just if we said, well, I learned a lot from that. Let me just see what I can do. Limit processed foods right there, right? Especially wheat products. But they're fortified with folic acid, like in the 1950s when it was like, well, let's start fortifying white bread, Wonder Bread, and we'll make it a health food, right? So people like, well, I'm getting it in that. Oh my goodness. Like, no. It's all processed. Foods naturally in folic acid are things like seafood, meat, pork, poultry, any gluten-free products. So what I call like real foods, right? The MTHFD1, a heterozygous result. So this is an enzyme that handles two significant parts of the methylation process. So since we have this, it's a pretty significant area of a methylation deficiency. And the MTHFR 677T, a heterozygous. So this can create significant biochemical effects, including poor production of dopamine, poor production of serotonin, weak mitochondria, and a decreased production of glutathione. Glutathione being the master antioxidant. We need to have that to detoxify. So that one simple gene right there, C677T, we're looking at, whoa, it could affect my dopamine, my serotonin, not having energy. Well, is the reason that you're down in the dumps because we don't have enough serotonin or dopamine? Or is it because your mitochondria is not creating energy?
Wow.
So, or should you be on an SSRI? Maybe, maybe not. What are we going to do about creating more energy aside from talk about it? How are we going to get that to happen, right? So this is the complexity of it.
Well, and that's again, like you're pulling the layer down and finding out the foundation is missing.
Correct. And use the analogy of foundation of a house. It's going to crumble.
Right.
You know, and it could even look good for a while because you put it up really fast and for cheap. But eventually it's going to crumble. It's the same thing with your body. It's foundational stuff that if we're not, whatever our operating system is within our DNA, if we're not optimizing that, we have a problem. And like when people go through their recommendations and their process, and it's like a 3 to 4 month thing that we're doing. And then we start to titrate down. We're like, okay, what do I do for a maintenance? If you had significant problems within methylation, I'm like, we're going to methylate. We're going to stay on that as a maintenance.
Right.
Because we've got everything else to where we need it. We got to stay there.
Right.
Once you give the body what it needs because it was missing what it needs to get to the final step, and it says, whoa, I recognize this. Now I'm using it. Now I can make it on my own. That's what's different.
Right. That makes perfect sense.
Yep. So then on the next page, we look at the B12 metabolism part of the methylation.
This isn't a good a good page.
So you've had better, Nick. This isn't the one we're going to hang on the fridge and send to mom and dad.
Right.
So TCN1, it creates a serum deficiency of B12. So I said two parts of that methylation, right? The B6, the B12, folate, they're all parts of it. And then the TCN2, we had a heterozygous polymorphism here, creates a lower B12 serum. The MTRR, the AGG, A66G, and the A664A both had a heterozygous result. This requires increased amounts of B12. So we look at that energy, mitochondria, we had some issues. Now B12, that's the first thing people think of. Well, do I need B12 shot? Do I need B12? It's like, we need to know all those other working parts of it too, but we put those two pieces together with you. That's significant. You're the guy who goes and works out because he's like, I know I need to. You could just as easy say, I'm tired tonight. I'm not going to do it.
Oh, right? Totally. Every day.
Yeah. Once you're there and you're doing it, the oxygen goes through your brain. You're like, I'm glad I'm here. But before it, you could have a list of 1,000 reasons that would be valid of why you have other things to do.
And it's genetics. It's not a mindset.
Exactly. Exactly. So then the methionine synthesis, that's still part of the methylation cycle. And methionine is used in protein formation. It's used in the stabilization of protein. So how important is that, right? And elevated levels of methionine can create an increased risk for things like coronary heart disease, for stroke, for neurological conditions. So each piece of this is so important. That's why when I started, people were like, well, I looked at my methylation, the MTFR gene. I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, there's so much more. I mean, look at all this stuff we're going through. We're on page 8. There's still a few more. Like, there's so much that goes into this. It's a giant recipe with a lot of ingredients.
Yeah, it's a recipe. Yep. And a lot of ingredients. And do we have all the ingredients we need to have the cake taste the way we want it to at the end, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So then the MTR, under methionine synthesis creates poor methylation associated with numerous neurological, cardiovascular, immunological disease states. In females, we could be seeing infertility and birth defects. So really important for a female to know that going into trying to get pregnant.
Oh my gosh. And with all of the fertility challenges and stuff that people are having now, like this, I never even thought of that. But like even understanding this level of your genetics.
Totally necessary.
Oh my gosh.
Totally necessary. Yep. So then the next category we're looking at on the next page is autophagy. Autophagy. Known about it for 50 to 100 years, I'd say. But it was only in 2016 that a Japanese physician won the Nobel Prize for understanding the intracellular working of autophagy. Autophagy, big picture, it's a garbage man of your cells. Every day it's normal for cells to die off. Every day it's normal for mitochondria to die off. We have to have a way to get rid of it. If we don't, the garbage is staying in our body. You know, the analogy I use is you went away on vacation, you left the garbage out, you forgot about it. You come back a week later, oh,
it stinks.
What's going on in my place? It stinks. Oh my goodness, because the garbage was left there. It's the same thing in your body. But then beyond that, what happens? Like it could affect, if you have carpeting in your home, that carpeting could smell. Your clothes in your closet, if it's close to that, could smell. Your furniture even, right? That could smell. So it affects everything around it. Same thing with your cells. It's not just that cell, it's all the other cells around it. Eventually it's going to wreak havoc. So we look at that ATG5, we had no problem. The ATG12 was where we had a heterozygous result. And this creates a cellular recycling. That's what it's responsible for. So it's going to recycle those cells. Well, if we're not recycling, it's going to lead to overall inflammation because we're not getting rid of the junk. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then the ATG16, really important. We have to have a way of creating kind of a vesicle for the elimination. So ATG16, that's one of its jobs, to create that vesicle, the way for the junk to leave, the garbage to leave. So we wind up with things like, if we're not getting rid of it, we wind up with things like fatty liver disease, diabetes type 2. Again, I go back to that NEI super system. How do all these things relate? This is exactly how. Now, if we bring into what we first talked about with those inflammatory markers, we have a line of inflammatory markers and we're having a problem with autophagy. We're going to feel sluggish. We're going to feel crummy. We're going to have a hard time getting to the gym before we even look at the mitochondria. Right? So,
and you know what's interesting is I have always felt I see the intermittent fasting. I intermittent fast. Yeah. But when I was younger, even in high school and stuff, whenever I would eat, I'm not a morning person, so I would always be up and running around to get to school on time and stuff like that. When I would eat breakfast, I would feel slow and sluggish all day. And I used to try, and then I tried, the trend of, you got to eat 5-6 meals a day. Like, always felt sluggish. I feel best when I would either start eating at lunchtime, or now, unless it's like sometimes on the weekend or something, I won't eat until 4 or 5 o'clock when I'll have my protein shake, and then I'll eat dinner at 6 or 7, and then I'm done. And I just eat in this like small window, and I feel so much better when I do that.
This is exactly why.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
The intermittent fasting. Yeah. So what's happening while you're doing that is it's so much work for your body to take in food, metabolize it, break it down, and now try to get rid of it. Talk about using up energy, right? So if we've already got problems with our mitochondria creating energy, now we've got this autophagy, you're going to feel exactly like you said. You felt sluggish, and it was, no, you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. So what we learned is that with intermittent fasting, your body's actually has the energy to use on creating more energy in those cells, instead of I'm trying to break down the food and get rid of it and metabolize it, which is so much work and effort. So with time of intermittent fasting, you actually become sharper, right? Cognitively, you're like, wow, the energy level is like, whoa, I feel so much better, because your operating system is optimal for you.
And that's why I think, like, again, this is what was so interesting just looking at this ahead of time. I feel with some of this, I'm like, oh, like some of this I learned by trial and error over the 39 years of my life.
Right.
But like to see this even there with this, it's like very validating to be like, okay, there's not anything wrong with you. This is just how you are wired.
Exactly. There's nothing wrong with you. This is how you work best. Right. And so much, and you're really in tune with yourself, which is great. Not everybody is. Somebody who's in tune with themselves is like, I just don't feel good. And someone's like, you have to do this, you have to do this. I'm like, I don't feel good doing that. Now you know why.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yep,
you know why.
exactly.
And that's the whole thing. It's like why we do what we do. Why are Biohealth looking at biomarkers? Because we learn what your unique why is. And then you can function so much better. And then we get to detoxification. Talked about, that we should be doing that normally every day. And when we get to the CTH, we have a heterozygous result. So this creates a need for, what it creates is a decreased glutathione mediated detoxification. So you don't have enough glutathione being made for that master antioxidant to be able to detoxify without being a little bit sluggish.
Interesting.
So now we combine that with what we just talked about with autophagy, where, the cellular function is related to things neurological, immunological, endocrine with diabetes, type 2 with fatty liver disease. We're not detoxifying enough. That's a lot going on.
How am I gonna optimize this operating system?
That's what we're gonna talk about. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. So that next page, we're still talking about that same area. So the CT, that was the GSTM3. So this is having to do with glutathione. What it does is conjugate glutathione. When we have a mutation here, it makes it more difficult for us to clear toxins, to clear anesthesia, to clear drugs, whether they be pharmaceutical or recreational, from our nervous system. Because conjugation means that it grabs, the glutathione helps grab these things that have to be eliminated. How does it do that? Well, it conjugates with bowel movements, right? We've got a material here we can hold on to get rid of it. We can urinate it out, but we have to have something to hold on to. That's why like fiber helps, because it's going to create more of a consistent base for it to be able to hold on to and be eliminated.
Right.
Okay. And then that GSTM1, glutathione S-transferase 1, so part of detoxification, and it allows us to conjugate with glutathione to the molecules of drugs, environmental toxins, and carcinogens for excretion. So, I've talked to people with problems with mutations in the GSTM3 and the one with the anesthesia, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had such trouble after I had this surgery with the anesthesia. I'm like, this is why. So if you've got that, if you're ever going to be under anesthesia, we need to create a plan before that happens. So we've got enough glutathione in you. We're going to need more for you to be able to clear those things out more easily. But there's so much. You see how things can be optimized this way.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's like not looking at one thing. It's how all of these things, and then realizing okay, I have inflammation. I have trouble detoxifying. I have all of these things. And then when you're detoxifying, you're keeping things in that'll keep you inflamed. And when it's like all of these things really are starting to come together. And again, a lot of it's very validating, but even hearing some of this stuff, it's like, oh, I did notice when I had my wisdom teeth out, for example, I had I forget what they call it, twilight anesthesia, but even that, it was kind of like touch and go coming out of that for a little bit.
Exactly. And then that's also the validating part. If someone says to you, why is that a big deal? You're just being, you're being a wimp or whatever. No, I'm not. This is real in my body. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
So then our next page and our last page, this is the neurotransmitters, those neuropsych genes. So the first one, COMT, that's the catecholaminemethyl methyltransferase gene. And its job is to degrade the neurotransmitters dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. we've got a homozygous result here. So both genes are affected. When we see a normal COMT gene, it allows us to easily reverse feelings of anxiety or depression. Someone with a variant in the COMT has more of a sluggish ability to alter that anxiety or that depression, staying in it longer.
That I have suffered from depression since I was like 6 years old. And I have had bouts where it just feels like it's never going to end. And again, like I have really put a lot of structure around my life to like, you know, let myself, if it gets really bad, sit in it for a minute, but like not, but man, is it hard to not spiral sometimes or just sit in it and just withdraw. And this one was another one that I was like, oh gosh, if only I knew this years and years ago.
Exactly. And this is, when I get to this page, this is kind of the crescendo of it all, right? Because this is where you see the symptoms play out in your life the most. You might be like, there's something going on in my body, but you don't know, is it the inflammation? Is it I'm not detoxifying? Is it the energy? When your mental health is not where it should be.
Exactly.
And this nails it. So it makes you more prone to prolonged episodes of anxiety, depression, even OCD type of thinking. And this is a huge one. I can't tell you, Nick, the amount of people that actually cry, but it's tears of joy, of relief for you just validated. You're saying since you were 5 or 6 years old, you're 39 now, all of these years, and you're told everything from get over it to
you don't have it that bad. People have it worse.
Somebody has it worse.
Get up and exercise. Go see friends. All of it.
all of it. And for most people, it's not for lack of already trying all those things, but you just get so tired of trying to defend why you're feeling the way you are. This is the why, right? This is the homework. So that's a really, really important one for so many people. And then the MAOA, or monoamine oxidase A. So no problem there. The MAOB, monoamine oxidase B. We have a homozygous result. This plays a role in the stability of the central nervous system. So it creates a higher risk for clinical depression and mood disorders. So we take MAOB, we just talked about COMT, like, whoa. Yes.
So I'm more susceptible to depression and then more susceptible to it lasting longer because of these two.
Correct. Yep.
Wow.
And then the GAD1 gene we had no problem with, but just to explain that, because this is an important one for people. So GAD1 means glutamic acid decarboxylase, tongue twister. So what it does is converts glutamic acid, which is a stimulant neurotransmitter, to GABA, which is a calming neurotransmitter. So if we never get to that calm, we never feel what we're supposed to be. When someone's like, just relax, you're like, wish I could.
Yeah.
Right? So that's an important one for people as well. And then the response to the SSRI is extremely important, because in your case, talking about depression since 5 or 6 years old, not for lack of trying, getting out there and doing everything, maybe having been on SSRIs.
I have been. I've been on several. I haven't in years now, but I tried several different ones, and none of them. The best result I had was feeling kind of like numb. The rest, it was like ups and downs. And
here's why.
Yeah.
And here's why. The HTR2 gene, where you have a homozygous result, this is the neuronal receptor for serotonin. So it creates the individual's response to an antidepressant or a mood drug or an appetite drug not being as effective. So this is the merry-go-round people go on. I went from this SSRI to this one. None of them worked. After a while, they're being told, oftentimes by their doctor, of, well, it should be better. It works. It's you.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth. It was never.
What a stupid thing to say, someone, by the way. Oh. It's you dealing with depression and looking for trying Medicaid. And it's you. You are the problem, turns out. Like, what a stupid thing to say.
Absolutely. Ugh. So what does that do to somebody emotionally? Rips them apart. Yep. You're already feeling low, Now somebody says, this is you just trying to be this way. Get over yourself. Whoa, whoa. But no one did a deeper dive to see why it wasn't effective for you. This was the answer the whole time of it was never going to work for you. We've got to figure out a different way for you. Right. And you figured that out back to you being really in touch with yourself. Like, these things aren't working for me. So,
which, by the way, like it's a lot of trial and error and learning myself. Like, I am very in touch with how I feel, how I think, what's going on in my body. But like, it's years and years of trial and error that a lot of this here, a lot of this is news to me, but like trial and error is how I got to this point. And this is like, you skip all of the trial and error in a sense, and you kind of understand what your starting point is. And that's why I think this is so important for people who, whether you're struggling physically, mentally, or both, that, you know, doing a test like this and understanding that it starts you out at like the 50-yard line instead of starting out at your opponent's 1-yard line, if I'm using a football analogy.
Yeah, great way to use an analogy there, because it's true. You know, it can eliminate so much pain and suffering. It can take us right to the answer. And in this day and age, the technology is here. We talked at the beginning of the show when this became available. It's recent history, but it's here now. So we need to employ it. We need to use it, especially if someone is on the merry-go-round of try this, try that, try that. Yeah. We have scientific data now. We need to use it.
Yeah.
And then that SLC6A4 heterozygous result. So this is called the SERT gene. It's responsible for clearing serotonin from the synaptic space where the axon and the dendrites sit, and the serotonin is in the middle. We've got to be able to clear that out. So if we have an error here, we have a higher risk of anxiety and depression with a less effective response to an SSRI. Boom.
So would this be like an SNRI? Would that be a better option with this, or is there
possibly? We would do a neurotransmitter specific lab and measure serotonin, measure dopamine, measure norepinephrine, measure epinephrine, measure DEA, a lot of other chemicals, to know exactly where you are, and then say, boom, yeah, SSNRI. Like there are other ways to do this.
Oh, I wish everyone could take this test and take it as like a teenager, if not younger, to like kind of avoid all of the trial and error that we're forced to do on this stuff, especially with, I mean, the physical health, but like with the mental health, that's so impactful, especially as more and more people are suffering with anxiety and depression and other mental health conditions. Like, getting this blueprint would just be such a better starting point than where we are. And I think the first time I tried an SSRI I was 22.
Okay.
And I went through up until probably like 31 or 32 when I just decided they weren't working for me. I just tried 4 or 5 different ones, and they all had a different impact or no impact. Or at one point I had one where I like became virtually suicidal, which was not something, that I'd ever felt before. And I was well enough to know that medication was influencing me. Right. But, I think about people going through some of this stuff, and the people that really suffer with deep, deep mental health issues, and they just trial and error for their whole life.
Right. Right. Exactly right. And you have the courage to talk about that, of what you experienced. That's a really, dark point in someone's life. And if it can be avoided, my gosh, doesn't it make sense? And doing this in someone's life while they're still young is to know. I mean, I've talked to the individual as well as their parents, say like, that 20, 21-year-old, and the parents like, but we've never seen this in our child. We've never seen this show up. Well, what happened between 20 and 21? They went off to college. They're managing their own lives for the first time. They have a part-time job. They're not sleeping. They're partying. They're going out with friends. Well, this DNA was always here. We just didn't see it the way we do now because the environment was always the same. Now there's a totally new environment, and we see literally a new person showing up.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the power of knowing what's there. What do we need to know? Because we have to have a game plan before we get to any of these places. And prevention is, that would be like my sweet spot of life. Like, to be used as prevention means we've actually evolved as a society to get to the point of saying suffering to that level doesn't need to happen.
Right.
Let's prevent it. And then doesn't it take the whole validity of science and actually say, yeah,
that's exactly it. It takes the validity of science.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a lot of information, right?
Yes.
That's a lot to go over. But I mean, how does it make you feel after you hear all this?
Yeah. So it like I said, it validates a lot of things that I've kind of traveled my way into over the years of trial and error and seeing, checking in how I feel and seeing what impacts me and doesn't impact me. Again, it's validating this slide, like you said, specifically is like, oh my gosh, and all, I think back to all the years I would tell myself, there's something wrong with you. Like even as a kid, I'd be like, there's something wrong with you that you don't want to go do anything or see friends on the weekends. Like you just want to be by yourself. Like and some of it's learning I was an introvert on that side too. But like it's just kind of like years and years of beating myself up, thinking that there was something wrong with me. And all along, it was like I was doing the best I could with the genetics I was given.
Right.
Same with like, I still am very hard on myself. We all have like stuff we do about our weight and our body, but even seeing the validation there of like, yeah, I do. I work out really hard. I eat really well to look mediocre. Like, it's very like, it's very hard because for years I was like, why am I just not working out the right way? Like, so it's hard to kind of see it or think back to all the ways I was hard on myself, thinking that it was me. And it was me, but like thinking it was my mindset or that I wasn't tough enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So where it leaves me, like there's a lot here. I have a lot of red and a lot of yellow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like what next, I guess is my question. Like, what do I do with all of this?
Right. So that's where we create the recommendations. And again, a place where, like a company that's saying, well, we'll do methylation genes for you. It's one, look, that was an important piece, but it wasn't the whole story, right? So just like we go over every single gene with somebody, like we just did with you, that's how we do it with our clients and our patients. It's every single one, because now just as this is individual, this is you, so are the recommendations individual. It's not a computer spit out, here you go, this is what you're going to do. Even down to the lifestyle things like we talked about with the intermittent fasting and why that worked for you, because it's actually how your body's operating system is going to work best. So then we go over the recommendations individually for you down to the dosing of what those are. And like I said earlier, it was, we create a plan for like 3 to 4 months because we've identified the areas that your body is missing what it needs. We then say, okay, here's what we're going to give you. First, your body says, whoa, I've got this stuff. Let me use it. Let me put it into these. Because what we do is look at the biochemical pathways of everything we're talking about. So all of a sudden, your body in this biochemical pathway says, now I have this. Okay, let me try to use it.
And then let me re-optimize because now I have this.
Exactly. Then your body says, whoa, I'm doing better using this. And then your body starts to say, I can make this. That's our goal, right? So not a Band-Aid on it, not a quick fix. It's like, whoa, now, because we've given your body everything it needs. I said earlier, there's not a pharmaceutical in any of our cells, yet that's what we're giving it. What's in that cell that we're missing?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's almost like you're recoding, to use the operating system. You're recoding the operating system with these recommendations to be more optimized.
Exactly. So then your body starts using it. Whoa, symptomatically you're feeling better. You're doing great. You're like, I've never felt this good. Terrific. Let's start titrating down slowly. Let's start, decreasing our doses, see if your body continues to hold what it's doing. And I said, for a lot of people, the methylation part of it, if we had significant SNPs or polymorphisms in the methylation, I'd say, let's stay on the methylation, maintain it. Is there anything else we need to stand? Maybe a little bit longer, but we then get off of it. None of it is made to be you taking it forever,
permanent,
right? We want to get out of the way. I call it catch and release, right? We want to catch you. We want to give you what you need to get it going. It's working. Now we're going to release you, and let's say whenever down the road, you're under a lot of undue stress again in your life. Well, do our weaknesses start showing up again? Okay, what do we need to do? Right?
Yeah.
What do we need to do again? Because
it's like training. You're training yourself. And if you stop for a little bit, sometimes you pick it back up. It's muscle memory. Sometimes you need a little more again. Yeah.
Exactly. You got it. You nailed it. So if you want, we can go through the individual recommendations, Nick, or we can kind of, here's the big picture.
What? Well, I would love to go through the individual recommendations, but
I want you to, but for the listeners, I don't know how often you like to make your show. Yeah,
maybe for the listeners, what if we kind of go overall, and then maybe we pick like one area you think is, because we're already at an hour and a half. Maybe we go like one area. If you've got the time, we go one area that maybe is the biggest one, and we can kind of deep dive there.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
can you make this bigger for me?
Yes. Where do I want to?
You want to go to the recommendations, the other.
Okay. Oh, the other one.
The other file. Yep.
This one. Okay.
All right. So basically, this is just a summary page in that first page of everything that we looked at and why, and then the big picture pieces. Like I focused on the methylation because most people do understand that already. And if you're not methylating, then whatever we've got to work with in your DNA, we're not going to be able to optimize. And then methylation is important for detoxification. We have to detoxify every day. We talked about that, those autophagy genes. We have to be able to get rid of the garbage. We can't let it live rent-free in our bodies, right? So, and then the absorption of nutrients. We could eat a perfect diet, and I've seen that with people. They eat a perfect diet, but they're not methylating. They're not getting the nutrients that they need for their bodies to work and be able to fulfill these biochemical pathways the way they're supposed to.
That's so tough because you think you're getting the nutrients and you're doing it right, and then your body's just not even absorbing them the right way.
Exactly, and you're banging your head against the wall. What am I doing wrong? And it's not you at all. You're not. It's how you're wired. Back to this is just a weakness here. So then we get to, if you go to the next page. All right. Are you able to make that bigger for me, Nick?
Yes. How's that? You want a little bigger?
Yeah, if you can.
How's that?
Okay, good. So that first that you see there, and I don't know that we need to be talking about names of any of these products for people, but I mean like brands, I should say, not names.
Yeah.
So the the PEA-SU support has to do with those inflammatory markers. We have to control that inflammation because we talked about how important the inflammatory response was to diseases, especially different cancers, cardiovascular disease, even diabetes. Okay. So that PEA-SU support is an aid for that. And like I talked about, it's a fatty acid, and in someone who has all these inflammatory markers, they're not making enough of it. So we give it to the body, it recognizes it, it starts to use it, it says, okay, I can make these. Really important part, even down to the inflammaging, that new term that I talked about.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, the inflammation thing is alarming to me.
Yes. It has to do with so many disease processes. That's a really big deal. What's the next one under there? I'm trying to look at your
Immune Restore Plus.
Okay, so for those immune response too. So in this case, I would pick either one. I would start with the PEA-SU support because I also don't like to layer on too much, because I don't want your body's response to forget, okay, what do I do with this? How do I do this, right? Because you can get out of control. I hear people, I just read this article and it says I'm making this. I'm like, slow down. Like
Pump
there's a danger in that. People get into this place of it's over the counter, so it doesn't matter. It certainly does matter. Everything we put into our body is going to change the operating biochemical pathway.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
And then that DCI, 500 milligrams. So this is dechiroinositol. This has to do with creating the body's ability for the mitochondria to make energy that it needs from the food it eats. If we're not converting to the sugar that we need, we're not going to make the energy.
Right.
The DCI people do feel like, whoa, I know when I take that and I know when I don't. A lot of times, we're all human. People say, I did it for a while and then I came off of it. I didn't know how much it was doing till I stopped taking it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all do that. We all think.
That was how I found out about gluten. It was when I re-added it to my diet that I realized how much better I felt without it.
Exactly. And then that NAS enhancer, that has to do with the autophagy. They're removing the garbage. Okay. So really important. And then that methylation piece, the methylfolate plus, really important. As I said, we've got to be methylating, such an important process. And sometimes I'll have someone maintain with the methylfolate, and that would be your case. We'll probably wind up, as we go through this process together, you'll stay on that. And then the mitocell PQQ, this is going to help the mitochondria create energy, right? So really important process. And then the D3K2, we need that cofactor to make the D work. So all of those things together is what addresses each one of those different subsets of what we looked at. And again, we saw what we needed to make it work. We give it to the body. We do it long enough. It starts to recognize it. Now it says, I can make this.
And I just want to note, and we said this, but these are all over the counter supplementations.
Correct. And I have our clients and our patients go to, I send them a link. So we know that they're getting pharmaceutical grade. They're not buying, I don't want to use anybody's names, but they're not buying junk.
Yeah, exactly.
And
they're all vetted and and I think that's important because you don't know what you don't know. And you assume when you're buying a vitamin DK2 capsule that vitamin is getting what you're buying. Yeah.
You think they're all the same. It says on the label, that's what it is. But because there is no regulation system, they could have 1% vitamin D, 99% filler, and still call it vitamin D.
Yeah.
So I know the results I'm going to get with the different brands that I use.
Gotcha. Right. I think that's important to notate.
Yeah, we send a link and then, order this, and this, and then I send an e-script and, this is what we're going to get. And then under those lifestyle recommendations.
Now, can I ask a question? I'm sorry, for the supplements, people who have an HSA.
Yes.
Can they use that fund account to, because that's what you can write the e-script for, right?
Yeah. And then, end of year stuff, woo! Use that money. Don't let it sit there. You're leaving money on the table. And a lot of people do that. They'll use their FSAs, their HSAs. And
I've just learned, I learned like a year ago, but I had a guest on my show. His name's Callie Means. You may have heard him. He's kind of in the news now. And he has a company, True Med, I think. Forgive me if it's not, but basically they're building a network of doctors that are writing health prescriptions and supplement prescriptions for people, so they can use their HSA funds for diet and supplementation and get healthier overall. So it's good to see that piece of it, because I think for a lot of people, using that HSA is going to make this much easier for them to digest.
Yeah. And even the lab portion of it.
Yeah.
A lot of HSAs you can use it for. So,
that's good to know. I was going to ask that. Great. I forgot. I'm glad you brought that up.
That's great. And then if you just raise your page up, Nick, the lifestyle recommendations. So we would want to consider a anti-inflammatory diet, right? Because
what does that look like?
So real food. I'll categorize it as real food. Any processed food is going to take those inflammatory markers and skyrocket them. Okay, eliminating as much sugar as we can, but meats, vegetables, fruits, any real food. And while we're on food, it's I always tell people, eat the rainbow, because in the richer the color of the food, the more nutrients it has in it, right? And we're getting different nutrients in those different colors. One of the most perfect foods is sweet potato. It has, it has all these minerals that we're missing out. People like the electrolyte buzz. Let me go take my electrolytes. Just eat real food, right? And if you're methylating it, you're getting exactly what you need. But it's one of the most perfect foods, but a great example. And then
I like that. I've been trying to eat more sweet potatoes, actually.
It's a great food.
So let's start that movement. Eat more sweet potatoes.
Yeah. It's also, if you want to get pregnant, eat more sweet potatoes.
Okay.
Yeah. But a great food, and it's also got a lot of fiber in it. So we talked about having to remove toxins, and we want to conjugate. We have to have a fibrous food to hold on to help eliminate. Apples are great for doing that. Sweet potatoes, anything with a lot of fiber in it is great for that. So yeah, it's really thinking about using food as medicine. Hippocrates, 1200 years ago, said, let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. When you think about food as fuel, you really start to say, is this a good choice for me? Or, is this a better choice? You really do, right? You start to look at what you're doing and say, what is this going to do? Is it going to fuel me? Is it going to help me with all these areas that I just learned about me? So being more mindful is really good, but eating real food is the best way for an anti-inflammatory. And then that fasting that we talked about, that intermittent fasting, your window is like that 12 to 15 hours. When we start getting past the 15 hours, that's where we're using it more for weight loss. When we get into the 16 hour, the 17 hour, even the 18 hour, that's when you start to see the pounds come off. Before that, we're doing it to create more energy in our bodies, right? And then I
can't tell you how sluggish I feel if I eat breakfast or it's the whole day. I just so sluggish.
Well, what's one of the reasons? Like we just had Thanksgiving, so now we're going into the holiday season. Why people this time of year feel like, oh my gosh, I have no energy, because you're eating different. We're eating a lot more junk, right? The parties, the desserts we may not normally eat. And then we're eating more often because it's like, well, we got a Christmas party here. We got to go have lunch with this guy. I haven't seen him in forever. Make sure we say hello and I appreciate your business to everybody and that kind of thing. So we're eating a lot more. And our bodies tell us like, hey, this isn't the best for me.
Yeah.
And when people are trying to start that intermittent fasting, I'm like, okay, I tell them like your goal, like for you, the goal is between 12 and 15 hours. If 12 is all you can do to start, go there and then do that for a couple of days and try to make it 12 and a half hours. Try to make it 13, but get into it progressively. And then if you're doing
what I did too, because I got myself to this point, I didn't just wake up one day. It would be like, I'm going to eat lunch. And then I pushed lunch back. And again, working from home has helped with this. But then I pushed lunch back. I wasn't eating lunch until 2. And then I started pushing back. I wasn't eating anything till 3. And I just did it slowly over the last really 2 years where I got myself in this tighter window. So don't think it's all or nothing. Like you can start where you need to start if you want to intermittent fast and then just slowly close that window.
Right. Exactly. And then on the losing weight part of it, it's like, get yourself, you've gotten to the 15 hours. Now you want to try to get into the 16, go slow, go slow, not to where you're passing out because your body's not used to it, and it doesn't have anything to keep going, but go slow and then know enough to say, like a lot of people will say, like I started breaking out places that I would have never seen that. Why? Because our organ system is our largest, or like skin is our largest organ system of our body. So it's going to try to use your skin to eliminate toxins. So that's why we'll see like the acne breakouts on someone's back where they never, like I've never had acne on my back, or even like little bumps on their arms. Like it's your body saying, I am now using this energy to get rid of toxins. Whereas before you were eating so much, I never had the leftover energy. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. It can really be used as a tool for weight loss as well. And then in your case, anybody's case, but especially in yours, you've got to avoid pesticides and herbicides because you're not going to detoxify those the way you need to.
Yeah. And I do. I've been buying organic for like 12 years when I first learned about herbicides and pesticides and all of that stuff. I try to shop locally at farmers market when I can, or do organic, which I recommend to everyone. I know it's more expensive, but you're going to pay for it later.
Yeah, pay double.
Yeah.
Yep. And then caution with a long duration of anesthesia. So if you're ever going to know that you're going under, we'll create a plan to boost your glutathione prior to it, so we know your body is going to be in the best shape it can to be able to detoxify after that. And glutathione treatments, again, the glutathione part of things. And then staying away from the mold exposure, the fungus, that kind of thing, the yeast exposure that your body is not going to be able to just jump away from and rid itself of. So really important pieces. On the what we've talked about earlier, Nick, the depression part of things, is that something that you still struggle with?
I do. I would say I don't struggle as roughly as I used to, but I do still have sort of these moments. They don't last as long. I would say my baseline is much higher than it used to be, but I've done a lot of different types of things to sort of combat that. Like I did TMS treatment. I don't know if you're familiar. Yep. I did that a couple of years ago. I feel like that really raised my baseline.
Okay.
And then, I do a lot of, I do some supplementing, vitamin D, some other stuff as well. I think that helps. And then I make sure that I move. Like that is so important to me, to move.
Yeah, that's naturally a way to raise your serotonin. And that's why so many people be like, that's a non-negotiable for me.
Yep.
Because the before and after is so heightened, right? For you, if that's a situation. I asked that question because we'll start with what we talked about with what I want to address in those particular areas. And then we could always add on the neurotransmitter metabolites, looking at the specific serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, those kind of things. But we're at a very good starting place. And then one of the other labs that sometimes I'll recommend to people, specifically if they're taking a lot of meds or they've had adverse reactions to meds, is doing what's called a pharmacogenomic lab test.
I know, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. So it looks at your particular DNA and if a pharmaceutical is going to be safe, cautionary, and not to be used. It was really oversold initially as picking the right drug for you. That's not what it is. Is it safe for you?
Which is a much better way to look at it, in my opinion.
That should be another starting point for everybody. You know? Like, why do we have to wait until we find the black box warning and somebody is hospitalized because of an adverse effect and now their life is upside down for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years? Why don't we know that information, right? So I will send you the e-link, the e-script for all that and what we're going to do. And the dosing is on your report. That should be the next page. Yep.
So I think that this is, again, really helpful, very validating, a lot to learn. And I think what I'm hoping people got out of this actually is that this is a very thorough look at the genetics of why you are the way you are, as opposed to the symptoms that come from the way that your body processes or doesn't process things. So what I want to ask you to kind of wrap up here is, not like what's your pitch, but more so like what would you say to people who have listened to this, know a lot more about my genetic code that we learned together today than before, but what's your recommendation to people who maybe want to move forward with this type of test? And
Sure. First off, like I said earlier in the show, Nick, really everybody should have this done, because you now know where your strengths lie, where your weaknesses lie. We all have both, but it's knowing what they are and what to do with them. Most importantly, we can prevent so much. Just talking about you being courageous enough, to talk about your own struggles. And it does take courage. It's easy just to talk about everybody else, but never fillet yourself wide open to the public. And I guess you already did that the first time when you didn't know it was going to happen.
I've done it a lot.
Now, let me be the one who tells you my truth. So,
but I did it here because I want, first, it's interesting to me. Second of all, like, I want people to see that this isn't like a sales pitch or something. Like, there's real science that is not openly out there and talked about enough. And if I can share what the experience is like, even
Right.
working with this,
Right.
working with you. I
Right.
think that's important to people to know. It's out there. It's not hard. It isn't. It isn't. It isn't going to. Yeah, you swabbed your mouth. It isn't hard, and you're going to get information that's going to be invaluable into optimizing your body.
Everybody should really, perfect world, everybody would have this done, because we can eliminate so many problems, so many sufferings. We can prevent so much disease and conditions that it should be, like I use the analogy of a CBC, something that we do. And beyond that, a CBC you do every year when you go for your yearly exam. This is a one-time test, because your DNA is your DNA. What changes is the expression of your DNA. And what we've been talking about here is epigenetics, to say, how do we optimize what we have to work with? So to me, everybody should have it done. In a perfect world, it's done before any problems are encountered, because then we know with a lot more certainty instead of guessing what we should be doing. And just using the example that you did about your SSRIs and switching them and nothing working should be so validating, because it wasn't going to work.
It was never going to work. I wasn't genetically available for them to work.
Right. So we have to figure out another way to get you there. And all of these pieces are involved in the other way to get you there. As you saw, nothing operates in a silo in our bodies. They're all layered on top of each other. So someone's like, here, do this and do it now, because this is all you need. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah,
nothing.
Exactly. And that's what I hope people get out of going through this with me. And I know it's been long. We've been going for a long time. And if you're still here, I hope that you did find this helpful to realize that it isn't siloed issues and symptoms. Like all of our bodies are a giant machine. And if one thing isn't firing the right way, it's going to impact all the other things. And I hope that was kind of a good takeaway people got from this today.
Absolutely. And the science is here now. It wasn't before.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up. Why didn't I do this earlier? Because it wasn't available.
Yeah.
Now it is. So now is the time that we take action. It's a different time, and we can use science instead of guessing. We should be beyond the stage of let's try this, let's try that, let's double it, let's half it. Why didn't that work? We should have a much more funneled, streamlined process to how we get there and arrive at optimizing someone.
I think that's a great point. And we have it now. So tell people, where can they find you?
Sure.
And how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So our website is Wired Biohealth, www.wiredbiohealth.com. Go on there. We, you can set up a consultation. You can read a lot before it. But that's the best way to start the process, because we do work with people all over the world. We drop ship the lab kits to you. So this is done
within a few days. I got mine within a few days.
Yep. And then we get the results back about 10 days later. We look at every one of those biochemical pathways. What do we need to do to support this? Then we go over, just like we did with you, Nick, we go over each one of those genes and say, if we have a problem, how deep is that problem and what do we need to do about it? And then when we go over your individual recommendations, they are just as individual as your findings were, even down to the dosing of what we have to do. It's not the same for everybody. I mean, I started out by saying we had 8 billion people in the world with 8 billion different sets of DNA, yet we treat everybody exactly the same. It doesn't make sense. Before we didn't have the science, now we do.
And I would just encourage everyone too, when's the last time that a doctor sat down with you at this level of detail about your health? Because for me, I know it hasn't ever happened. So thank you for that. And
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
As you can tell, it excites me, because I know it changes people's lives. I know it does, and they come back and tell us, or, just going over it, when I see someone's reaction to, oh my God, my whole life, I've always felt like I couldn't share how I was really feeling inside. Now I get it. It's
a game changer.
Yeah.
It's a game changer. And all of those links, by the way, are in the show notes. Again, thank you for listening to this, everyone. This is part 2. Part 1, if you want to learn more about the technology versus my specific, I should say science. I hate when we call science technology, but that's a personal thing. The science.
There is technology in this.
Yeah. The science, make sure you listen to the previous episode. So thanks again for coming on. This has been really exciting for me to do. And I appreciate you sharing it in such detail with the audience.
It's been my pleasure, Nick. And your voice can really, be used to help change people's lives. So that's a beautiful thing that you're doing. And I appreciate you for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of Eyes Wide Open. If you enjoy the show, the best way to support us is by sharing or dropping a review. For more information and content, check out engagewithnick.com or find me on Instagram at nthompson513. Don't go through life blind. Do the work so you can show up in the world with your eyes wide open.